We are back for another video. Today we're going to tap into the mitochondria, and understanding energy dynamics of it, the TCA cycle. Let me see if I can pronounce it: tricarboxylic acid cycle, or Krebs cycle, to be more precise and simplistic, and the reversal effects of this, because that's something that might come as almost a shock that it can work both ways. Do you want to open up and kind of explain the basics of mitochondria, what it actually does? Because we have talked about it many, many times, but let's imagine that nobody has ever heard a single video of everything that we have put out for over the last years. So what is the role of mitochondria, and what does it do? Why is it so goddamn important?
Yeah. Let's do that. So first thing, right? Let's talk about what the mitochondrion is, right? As far as this guy right here, right? This is just a simple drawing. A lot of people, if you can Google it and stuff like that. And a mitochondrion is essentially a bacteria. It's a bacteria that it powers all cells within your body, except for red blood cells. Red blood cells are the only cells in the whole human body that do not have any mitochondria. There's reasons for that, but we won't get into that into this video. But essentially, you can think of every cell in your body. Let's just take a skin cell, for example, probably has hundreds of mitochondria in it. And most textbooks are going to talk about what's going on right here in front of us right now, which is that the mitochondria is taking energy from food, NADH and FADH. FADH is not shown here, but it's been in other videos. It's actually shown right here on this other part. That you see it goes to cytochrome 2, and NADH goes to cytochrome 1. Those are gibbons of food. All your food turns eventually into FADH or NADH. And essentially, you're taught that food through this process in the mitochondria gets turned into electrical energy, because these NADH and FADH molecules donate electrons to the electron transport chain, and that electricity is going to run through this wire, if you want to call it a wire, and at the end of the chain turns into ATP, or spins this ATPase. And that's essentially, high level, very quick overview of what's going on in there. But there's something else, right? Where does this NADH and FADH come from? How does the food get broken down into that? And that's what this little guy right here is, the Krebs cycle, right? The Krebs cycle is the process by which food molecules can be broken down into these FADH and NADH. So I'm just going to bring it over here. This is, obviously showing all of the molecules, all the chemicals. We'll look at a more simplified version, but this is what you're taught in school and stuff like that, that, hey, this TCA cycle, or how it's shown here, Krebs cycle, is going through, and you can see the gibbons out right here. So NADH is coming out of that process. NADH is coming out of this process. NADH right here, and then FADH happens only in like 2 or 3 processes. And again, this is dependent on the food type. If you are carbohydrate, mainly is what's coming into the metabolism, you're going to make a lot more NADH. And if fats are coming into the system, more FADH will come about. It's not on or off. It's not one or the other. It's just a gradient. It's either one slightly more biased or the other slightly more biased. And we've had videos about this, especially our calorie talk video on the difference. But now we're going to focus on the TCA cycle, right? Everybody is taught that it moves in this direction, right? So now I'm going to go to a screenshot here just to make it more simple, right? And this is, without all the, chemical jargon or anything like that, but it's very, very simple. The Krebs cycle is moving in this clockwise direction. And as it moves in the clockwise direction, hydrogen is coming over to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So this is the mitochondrial membrane. And that is in the form of NADH and FADH. And you, at the end of this process, you are leaving out CO2. And we know that we breathe out CO2. right? So everybody's taught that this is how it works. And in this process, you're making amino acids for genes, for other peptides like GLP-1, like basically just about everything you can imagine. Amino acids are the building blocks of everything, not just muscle tissue. Again, we have a full video on that. And then nucleotides. This is for genetic material. So in this process, you're making all of the building blocks to essentially power and make biology happen. And that's kind of how most people leave it. But there's something very unique and interesting that this is a bacteria, right? This is a bacteria. The whole thing is a bacteria. And bacteria didn't run this way all the time. Why? Because oxygen wasn't the dominant gas in our atmosphere to begin with when evolution started. So, in fact, we know this for a fact that bacteria actually run in the opposite direction normally. And the main thing that you got to take about right now is when the Krebs cycle is running in a clockwise direction, CO2 goes out, hydrogen goes out, ATP is made, and all of your building blocks are made. Okay. Now, what happens if you reverse it? What does that look like? And we know this again from studying other bacteria that is not the mitochondria, and that moves in the opposite direction, right? So we are now moving counterclockwise. We are taking in CO2 at that point. We're taking in hydrogen. We're not making nearly as much ATP, but we are still manufacturing amino acids and nucleotides. In fact, when the Krebs cycle moves in a counterclockwise direction, we actually know this. It is about 4 times more efficient at making amino acids and nucleotides. So in other words, when it moves counterclockwise, you are a building machine. You are building lots of amino acids, lots of peptides, and not lots of nucleotides. You are essentially in build mode when it moves in this direction. Now, we know this. Everybody knows this because this is how cancer cells operate. This is called the Warburg effect. What is a cancer cell doing? It is replicating at an astonishing rate because it forgets how to move in the clockwise direction. It doesn't understand information anymore, and it doesn't understand timing anymore, but it still is a cell and it's still alive. And the primary function of any cell is to revert back to its base model. Its base model is let's make a bunch of things and replicate, right? This is the base model for all mitochondria. So when you get cancer, a cancerous cell is just a cell that's forgotten that it's part of a human, and it's in charge of building, and it is going to build and build and build and build. Now, that's actually what should be happening at certain times of the day in certain tissues, and at other times of the day in other tissues, it should be looking like what we're taught in textbooks. It should be moving in the clockwise direction. And in the clockwise direction, you make less amino acids and nucleotides, and you make way more ATP because now you're funneling more of the H2 into the ATP making process and not less. So now you start to see why circadian mechanisms are the way that your body tells each mitochondria which way it should be moving at certain times. So for example, we also know from sleep studies that during REM sleep, we don't make any ATP. We make so little ATP that we actually can't measure it. What does that sound like? It sounds like we're making a bunch of things, but we're not prioritizing energy. It sounds like your mitochondria are moving in the counterclockwise direction because it's a rest and repair scenario. You don't need ATP, so why would you waste energy making it? But you do need lots of peptide manufacturing. We also know that most of your peptides are going to be made at night. Growth hormone secretion, ghrelin suppression, the future manufacturing of what needs to happen for other peptides that happen in the morning time frame that we know about. That is what should be happening. So now to tie this kind of together with a lot of the stuff that we talk about, there has to be something non-chemical, meaning not within your body, that tells the cells the timing of when it should move from a counterclockwise moving direction to a clockwise moving direction. And we also know that this is reversible in nocturnal versus diurnal creatures, meaning if you're a nocturnal creature, the same switch that moves this clockwise for you will move it counterclockwise for a diurnal creature because your rest and repair cycles are flipped, right? So when we talk about what circadian mechanism is, I'm not ever really referring to when you wake up and when you sleep. I'm referring to when is the signals of your genetic makeup going to reverse the TCA cycle, or whether it's actually going in reverse counterclockwise or reversing it once again to go clockwise. Now, this is also tissue dependent. We know this from ophthalmology. Your eye, a lot of people don't know this, it actually permanently runs in the counterclockwise direction. Most people may know this, and it's very Googleable. You can find it out from a simple Google search, is your eye is the fastest repairing tissue on the whole body. There's a reason for that, because it's always running the Warburg effect. It's always running its mitochondria, its TCA cycle in reverse, so that it's always prioritizing building versus energy production. Now, there are other tissues that are flipped the other way, where it's always about energy and not about a lot of regeneration capabilities. But essentially, this is what gives complex life its complexity, is that as you evolve up the chain of evolution, your mitochondria has figured out how to compartmentalize certain tissues to prioritize the TCA cycle moving in reverse versus the TCA cycle moving in the clockwise direction, and manage to figure out, hey, there must be a signal that can tell us when to move it in one direction so that we can optimize energy production. Because at the end of the day, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Physics, that's physics 101, right? So you have to figure out a way to bias and be efficient at making things that you need to make and not wasting energy when you don't need to consume energy. That's what I just explained about how the TCA cycle can move in reverse or forward. Coincidentally, most people think that this is about genes, right? But here's what we also know about evolution. Bacteria don't have very many genes. They have very little genes. And we also know that the first bacteria didn't have much genetic makeup at all. They were called protocells. That means that this signaling of TCA cycle moving one way or the other is not from your genes. It's from an environmental signal. When the TCA cycle moves in one direction or the other, that turns on genes, which is also a concept that we brought about here recently, that your genes are an adaptation to the environment, not the other way around. Turning certain genes on and turning certain genes off is a misnomer. That's not really how they work. They get augmented or reduced depending on the environment that you are interacting with. So before I go any further, if you have any questions or anything
I
like
have a
that.
lot of questions. I'm like, okay, this is like waterfall. But this kind of explains the difference between REM and deep sleep, that sometimes you might have enough REM sleep or deep sleep, and your body will feel different depending on which one you get the most. So I have more mental clarity by having more REM sleep, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I will feel physically strong next day. Whereas if I have a lot of deep sleep, I might physically perform well, but I might still be full of brain fog, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So question following up from that is, how do we guarantee a healthy TCA cycle? Or how do we make sure that it's spinning the right way at the right time? Is there something that we can do?
Yes. And believe it or not, it's built into our system. It's built into our system, and it's so simple to understand that light frequencies dictate this. And not only do they dictate, like, hey, at this time it does this and at this time it does that, but because different light frequencies penetrate tissue at different levels, it also coordinates at the same time different tissues doing different things, right? So if you kind of visualize that, right, it's, hey, tissues that are on the surface they're going to immediately get turned on to spinning instead of calling it reverse and forward, we're just going to call it biasing towards energy or biasing towards building, right? So whenever your body experiences daylight, because you're a diurnal creature, the mechanisms within your body respond to daylight to turn the tissues that receive daylight into energy production mode, which is the forward direction. So things on your surfaces, aka your skin, your subcutaneous layer, your body fat, those are cells that are doing stuff. They're not dormant. All of these on the surfaces immediately can get turned to energy production mode just by getting daylight, sunlight on your body. Other things that will do that is anything that brings an electrical charge to the surface, right? And I say it that way because I'm going to explain it a little bit better. Cold will produce an electrical charge on the surfaces of your skin. That also activates daytime mode. That's the secondary mechanism when you're operating in winter mode, because the sun isn't nearly as strong to send the same signal, but it gets amplified when the temperature gets below 55 degrees. And what that does is it creates a charge on the surfaces by bringing respiratory chains of the mitochondria closer together and making electricity flow more efficiently. Now, I said electrical charge for a reason. Anything that puts an electrical charge on your surface will create the TCA cycle to move in that forward energy production mechanism. Electromagnetic fields will put a charge on the surface of your body, which will signal the TCA cycle to continue to move in the energy production mechanism. Now, when the mechanism is moving in the energy production mode, certain hormones are going to be released, like cortisol, right? So if you are, and that's supposed to happen at certain times of the day. In the morning, when you get an electrical charge from experiencing cold in the morning or daylight in the morning, cortisol should go nice and high, and it should have a smooth curve and level out. But let's say that you work indoors all the time, and now you're pulsing cortisol all the time because it's a stress response. But people label it as a stress response. It's not a stress response. It's just a response to always being activated into that energy production mode. You're always go, go, go. And what ends up happening over the course of, a decade or half a decade is that you have never actually induced a proper repair mode, aka TCA cycle moving in the reverse direction, so that you can be way more efficient at producing amino acids, nucleotides. And so you end up aging prematurely because you are faulty in the baseline molecules that make up your brain and your body, which is all of these amino acids that we've talked about in other videos and things of that nature. So this little video right now is kind of fundamental in tying everything else that we've talked about. That circadian mechanism is ensuring that you don't have an electrical charge when you're not supposed to have an electrical charge on your surfaces, because that's a key signaler to make the ATPA or the TCA cycle move in the energy production mode, which is the forward mode, when it's supposed to be turned the other direction at night so that you can go into building and repair mode.
So let me just kind of jump in quickly. Is this why we experience the like a sad mood in when winter comes and all those kind of things, because we don't have the setup needed anymore? So let me rephrase that in a way that we are spending so much time under artificial light now, even in a time when we shouldn't be, that our brain does not have sufficient amount of this reverse type of creation mode of TCA cycle for the hormones necessary for us to feel good.
Yes, and the peptides and the neurotransmitters. Yes, because peptides, neurotransmitters, those are all coming from amino acids, right? And what is the TCA cycle very efficient at when it goes in reverse? Amino acid production, lipid production, nucleotide production, right? It's not a big deal when you are experiencing natural large amounts of sunlight in the summer, because with that extra sunlight and that extra time with the TCA cycle moving in the forward direction, you become very efficient at the very short period of time at night to run in reverse, as long as you're not having an electromagnetic field interaction at night, right? That's why it's crucial to understand that man-made electromagnetic fields are the thing you want to circumvent at night. I'm not against technology. I mean, we're right here experiencing it right now, and I'm super grateful for it. The key is knowing these little gibbons and how they interact with your body so that you ensure that you're not interfering with natural processes that your body would do when it's supposed to do them. And you're right, in the wintertime, because you spend so much time inside, you're essentially augmenting that effect without any infrared light, providing the extra energy from a photoelectric effect to continue to run in an energy production mode. See, that's the other given in the summertime when it's long days. You're going to have extra infrared light from the sun, which is going to power cellular activity beyond what it's capable of normally when it's moving in a forward direction for a lot more hours out of the 24-hour clock. Does that make sense?
Well, that's the way I guess when people go on holiday in the winter, they feel great immediately.
Yeah,
So,
because they're immediately restored. So they don't have to take time to like restore the mitochondria to move in the backwards direction. They just have to supplement the energy deficit to continue to move in the forward direction, the energy production method. Now, I go a little bit more out of my way with my clients to explain, hey, if you live in a winter season, you don't necessarily have to move or go on vacation. But if you choose to stay, now you have to embrace wintertime mode, which is more TCA cycle moving in the reverse direction, which is building and restoring. What does that signal? That signals low electrical charge on the body, for more hours of the day than you're awake, which is normal because the sun goes down at a much earlier time. And what coincidentally happens when that TCA cycle moves in reverse? Melatonin gets raised to a high degree to promote more of the baseline signaling of creating peptides and hormones at night. Essentially, peptides and hormones at night in the wintertime are augmented and produced more abundantly so that you can survive what should technically be an energy deficit time of the year. The difference is we can go to the store and buy whatever we want, whenever we want. And most people will do that because they are feeling the energy deficit and they get hungrier and they get more cravings and they gain more weight. And the reason why you're not losing that weight, why you're not burning the body fat, is because you need the TCA cycle to move in the forward direction very efficiently to burn body fat. Now, if you're very big and muscular, that tank, that deficit, that deviation is just so large that you don't really notice it. But when you're a normal sized human being, you will notice it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, all this, when you go through all the kind of details about and differences about what it actually does in certain times of the day. So I would be interested into more strategies for different seasons of the year. What can we do and how can we use this knowledge in our advantage?
Yeah, very, very good point. So number one, okay, irrelevant of the time of the year, the thing you want to prioritize to ensure, right? Because I think by now most people will go, okay, so I want to make sure that at night, because I'm a diurnal creature, that my TCA cycle moves in reverse, right? So that by far is where I would start. Hey, whenever you sleep, you make sure that the sleeping environment is not producing an electrical charge on the body or being interpreted like it's an electrical charge from the sun, so that your TCA cycle moves in reverse, right? That's number one, so that you get the proper amount of correct amount of REM sleep versus deep sleep for your personal activity that happened during the day, right? So that's number one. That way you ensure that you're not always running in running mode, right? In energy production mode when you
So
should.
let me expand on that. That would mean try to get a way out of all electric appliances as much as you can. We know, we have tested, even if you have something charging in your room, even if it's just a TV that's plugged in, it's going to interfere with you. And does it also apply to, let's say, street lights, if you're not properly set up your bedroom that it's all blacked out? Because now street lights are so powerful, they just go through the blinds.
Yeah, I was going to
Would
say
it
it
be
depends.
beneficial to invest into something better? There are those films that you can put on windows. just because as far as we know, it's not just your eyes that catches the light, it's also your skin. So you don't want anything to not only get directly on your eyes, but also on your arms or anything that if you're laying down without cover, right?
Yes, yes. So the way that I like to describe it is you want to replicate a cave as much as possible, right? It needs to be dark, and you ideally don't have any electrical equipment in your room that's plugged in. And you ideally are grounded. That would be third stool that I don't talk about very much. Or, we have, but it's not something that comes up as priority number one. But if you want to, if you had all the money, you or could move or whatever, right? You have any means necessary to make this as healthy as possible. You make the room that you sleep in as close to a cave as possible with the comforts of having a bed in it, right? You're grounded. There's no light and there's no electricity in that room. That you can build that. You can have that built within your home, and the rest of the home can be as modern as you want if you've built it correctly. But now you've optimized TCA cycle moving in reverse or building block material, right? Now let's get into some of the other strategies that most people are kind of going to be somewhat familiar with, which is, okay, I work indoors, it's daytime. Now I want my TCA cycle actively moving in the forward direction appropriately so that I have plenty of energy, no brain fog, etc. So ideally, right, you are supplementing or getting somehow, naturally or synthetically, extra infrared light, right? Now, we'll start with the simple stuff that's free, which is you can work outside, right? If you live somewhere where that's possible. If you don't, the next option is ideally your office setting has a window or two that you can open, right? The window needs to be open because the glass prevents solar energy from coming in. That's what makes windows efficient. So you need to have a window open so that now you are getting infrared and UV light interacting with your cellular biology to continue to send those signals of, hey, at this time of the day, sex hormone manufacturing will be optimized and we'll put a lot of energy into that. At this other time of the day, we're going to manufacture endorphin related, neurotransmitter related type stuff like dopamine and adrenaline and noradrenaline so that you feel active during most of the day and things of that nature. Now, if you don't happen to have the luxury of being able to work outside or being able to open a window, now we get into strategies that some people will be familiar with, like red light therapy and things of that nature. But you have to understand that red light therapy is targeted therapy. It's very narrow. It's only red, right? So now that's a lot, right? Don't get me wrong. That's by far adding in a big amount of the electromagnetic spectrum from the sun that you are missing. About 70 to 80% of the sun's light that interacts with us is red, right? So infrared therapy is valid, and you're adding in 70 to 80% of the light frequencies that you're missing from the sun. But obviously that's not 100%, right? So red light therapy devices. This is a thing that we've talked about before, and we will make a video that's a little bit more detailed, but I'm just going to
few videos about that. People need to understand that it's not just buying a red light, it's understanding powerful.
We'll get into the details of the actual lights later, but for right now, just understand that a red light therapy device is more than just targeted therapy. When you're working indoors, you're supplementing light frequencies that you're normally missing. So having a red light therapy device on basically permanently, if you're in an office setting, is definitely beneficial. Shining at your torso and supplementing ATP production through red light therapy is a great thing to do when you work indoors. And essentially that can be on all the time. Now, you can do it with a red light therapy device, but you can also do it with older light bulbs, incandescent light bulbs, halogen light bulbs, high pressure sodium light bulbs. These are light bulbs that are going to put off heat. What is heat? Infrared light. That's what, when you get an infrared light therapy device, you will notice, I have mine on right here behind me. It's hot. It's putting off some heat. That is infrared therapy. This is more targeted. The other one's more broad, which is actually more beneficial because sunlight is broad. It's not just one frequency. The red light therapy device is going to target specific outcomes that you might need, like digestion problems or eye problems and things of that nature. You can shine them directly at certain places to get an actual therapeutic effect. But if you're just generally for health and optimizing your mitochondria, it can be done very simply with the right types of light bulbs specifically. um, then, like I said, that's only about 70 to 80% of the frequency that you're missing. There are other frequencies, specifically UVA and UVB, that come at certain times of the day, more towards the middle part of the day if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, which is between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. So supplementing some UV light, right? So I have my UVA device right here. Now, you used to have to get these separately, which is why I have them separate. But there are manufacturers of these lights that I've consulted with and stuff like that that have noticed that, hey, there is a demand that we're not quite getting the full picture. So they're starting to integrate UVA and UVB lights into their infrared therapy devices to make it more of a complete substitute. But you would want to supplement some UVA and some UVB during middle periods of the day in terms of your workstation or being indoors, right? Now, now let's address, excuse me, let's address people that don't work at a desk or at an office, but they still work indoors, right? They still have to be inside. That's where taking breaks becomes mandatory. Taking breaks, going outside, and when you go outside, because you haven't been supplementing much of anything during the day, because you can't, you want to expose as much skin as possible during that time period to absorb as much light frequency as possible. Let's just say you get a break at 10 o'clock a.m. That's a perfect time to go outside for 10 or 15 minutes, undress as much as possible, get as much solar energy as possible. You get a lunch break, eat your lunch break outside, etc. You get your 3 o'clock break, do that. And then if you work night shift or swing shift or things of that nature, or you just are somebody who permanently works at night or most of the night, that's where you're just going to have to bite the bullet and really invest in some high quality equipment because when you're supplementing, just because you work indoors, the lights can be small, right? Because you still have some time during the day, and ideally you make some time every couple hours to go outside anyway. But when you're permanently, trying to sleep during the day because you work at night type of scenario, that becomes more problematic. You need to invest in a little bit more high quality equipment that can deliver much more photonic energy.
So what I'm curious about is there any kind of nutritional or over-the-counter supplement interventions that we can use to further enhance all this?
So enhance, yes. Switch, no. So again, switching the TCA cycle to go forward or backwards, you're not going to be able to do that with any kind of nutritional protocol, because this is a photonic and physics equation that makes that switch happen, right? Now, enhancing, that's a different thing, right? So for example, if you're wanting to enhance the TCA cycle once it's moved in reverse, now we're talking about rest and restore and things of that nature. Yes, you can create an enhancement effect there by we'll start with supplements and upgrade to drugs, right? We'll go with something as simple as GABA, right? That's going to enhance that effect of resting and getting very, very, very deep sleep very quickly. It's going to speed up sleep efficiency. And if you've correctly signaled your TCA cycle to move in reverse, that's going to augment that effect. Let's go to a drug now, right? Let's add in just a simple replacement dose or slightly above replacement dose growth hormone. Well, that's going to augment recovery and all of the things that happen at night if you've placed it in that environment. Now, if you've placed growth hormone's kind of unique, which is why I brought it up. If you place growth hormone in the morning, let's say, and you've activated the TCA cycle to move in the energy production pathway, what gets catabolized to make energy the fastest? I said it earlier in this: fat. What do we know about growth hormone supplementation during the day? It accelerates fat reduction, because you place, again, the hormone's the same. You place growth hormone at night when you signaled everything correctly. Rest and restore gets augmented, but only if the TCA cycle got augmented correctly or switched on in that direction correctly. And then in the morning or during the day, if you switched on the TCA cycle correctly in the forward energy production direction, when you place growth hormone there, it does something slightly different and augments fat utilization. Right? This is why drugs do different things at different times of the day, because they're augmenting whether the TCA cycle is moving forward or moving backwards. So
does it apply to peptides as well? Because we have your CJCs and ipamorelins and all those.
absolutely. Yep. Because so peptides are a little bit unique because they're in the part of the mitochondria made them, right? So we talked earlier about, hey, the mitochondria is always trying to optimize either energy production, aka ATP, or optimize amino acid production, which is peptides, nucleotide production, which is genes and switching of genetic material and things of that nature. So peptides are in a side chain, if you want to call it, of the metabolism of the TCA cycle and the mitochondria. So because peptides are there, you can use peptides to almost help out the TCA cycle in whatever it's trying to augment. Growth hormone is a peptide. So we already kind of touched on peptides because growth hormone is peptide. If you introduce the peptide TCA cycle moving in reverse, augments rest and recovery and repair. If you introduce the peptide growth hormone in the TCA cycle moving in energy production, you're going to catabolize more fat. So ipamorelin, CJC, all of these are growth hormone type peptides. Those are going to have very similar effects, but in different outcomes. For example, CJC, not CJCs, let's talk GRPs, right? A lot of people use those for growth augmentation. What's the main thing they do? Hunger. They bring hunger, right? So when are you supposed to get hungry? During the day, right? So when you take some of these products, you should take them during the day. It will augment hunger during the day and growth and repair. If you take it at night, it will hit you, but it'll hit you the next day if you've signaled the TCA cycle to rest and repair, right? So you get more out of GRPs and all of these if you've taken them in the morning when you're starting this whole process and you're moving with the mitochondria of energy production and gathering energy, aka eating, versus other times, right? Other peptides, right? Like let's talk about GLP-1 drugs, right? Semaglutide, trizepatide, etc. All of those are going to be derivatives of what happens when leptin docks to the hypothalamus at night. So the best time to take those is actually going to be at night so that you wake up the next morning with a full load of GLP-1 in your system to start augmenting and regulating hunger and hunger cues. Now, most of these, have like a, they're supposed to have like a 7-day half-life and things of that nature. So they last a whole week. But I know certain people that are essentially in a bad environment and they are never in the rest and repair state, and their GLP-1 dosages are through the roof just to get an effect. And the dose doesn't last nearly 7 days. It only lasts 3 days or 4 days. And so something that we've started to do is microdosing it at night to amplify their effect the next day. So yes, you can take things, supplements, but basically every supplement that you've ever told that does a certain thing, it probably does it. But it doesn't do it all the time because of when you introduce it, it'll do something different or slightly different.
It makes so much sense now we're looking at that. But I'm mindful of your time, David. We're going to continue next time. So appreciate you as usual. And we'll continue on in next videos.
Awesome. Thank you.